The paper that I'm presenting on, picking up the slack, it was very funny. We'll get the presentation up. It's on the website. So first question to the audience, has anybody used Slack? All right, so anybody have it on their phone right now as they go? Okay, for those of you who don't or who haven't, what is Slack? It's communication software. It's a collaborative platform. Yeah, no worries. How much did it cost you? It is free. Okay, that's the first challenge. Whenever you have free software, someone's paying for it. So you are giving them your data. That's what's happening. And where is the data that you put on Slack hosted? Does anybody know? Oh, no one read the paper. Oh, maybe you do. Well, it's in AWS. So it's Amazon's cloud instance. So the reason why this is important, this is the practical implications of all of this. The reason why we studied Slack is because we had a client that came to us and said, you need to figure out what we do with Slack. So this is a client, these are Silicon Valley, up in San Francisco and in New York and in DC and in Austin. These are companies on the cutting edge, and they use these collaborative platforms like Slack, which I have to find the actual clicker here at some point. But all right, is where work is getting done. So Slack, again, cloud-based, collaborative. You're exchanging messages, you're transferring files, and it's free to a point. And you can buy different levels of service in Slack, and that's very, very important because buying additional levels increases the functionality. So of course here the client was looking at this, and the client is one of the co-authors of the paper. And I will say this too, quickest ROI on work ever, because we wrote the paper with the client, we worked through the issues, and normally with the law firm you say, okay, well, what will this lead to work? We finished the paper and the client said, have you ever written a policy on this before? We said no. He's like, okay, well, let's be the first. We want to get out ahead of this. And once it's written, I want to circulate this to all of the other general counsels in the tech space. I'm part of this big email network. We all talk about this all the time. The third point of that is, not only did we get the work in an area that was brand new, there was no guidance at all, if you get the guidance out and people start following it, in areas where it's a little ambiguous, guess what the standard starts to be? If you're the vanguard, you have the opportunity to set what the industry standard is. That's an extraordinarily important point, and it shows the type of power you have. And I want to relate this back to opportunities that India has. If you're out in front of these things, if you're starting to think 2 steps ahead where the technology is going, and there's no secret here, there's no secret that Slack's available. You go on the App Store, you can see what people are downloading and what they're using. You can start to think about the implications of that, and you can start to develop some of the thought leadership. It is free to write papers. It is free to share your thoughts. You could even push them out on Slack. Like, you can do those things. You can do that because that's what we've had the opportunity to do as well. So in looking at, let me see if I can move forward. Slack is important for some of the applications of what Jason was talking about with information governance. So we look at, what information governance is. Anybody familiar with the concept of shadow IT? Couple nods. I won't make you answer any other questions. Shadow IT is this idea that as a company, your employees can go out and get these types of platforms. Sometimes they can get them for free. Sometimes they can pay something on their own credit card, or maybe they have a little bit of discretionary budget. The important point is they're not running it through the proper channels, but your company is still using those technologies to transmit information. And your IT may not be aware of it. It may not be crossing the digital loss protection like your DLP or your firewall. You're not aware of that information, where it's going. You're not sure of the different protections. You might be running contrary or afoul of international issues where you're not allowed to actually send out certain types of technology. If they're not supposed to be exported to, let's say, North Korea or to China or to Iran or some of those places, if you're outside the normal channels of communication, you have to be really concerned with what's going on there. So again, free software, lack of restrictions. As I say in the US, you want to be careful about technology that's built for you to use on the toilet. If you can sit down in the restroom and use these technologies to share information around the world, chances are they haven't built a lot of good information governance into them. They're meant to, it's extraordinary. You have the power of the New York Times population base and publication area in the palm of your hands. You didn't go to journalism school. You don't have any idea what the rules are for sharing that type of information. If you want to talk about fake news, you can send whatever you want out there. And then the President of the United States can say, I read this on Twitter. It must be true. Let's establish policy off of that. It's an amazing time. I'd call it magical. That's not the right word. So when we deal with these with clients, this is what we go through. And this is really the trick of where you can start to develop these different practices. These are the questions we ask. And if you had gone to journalism school, and I don't know if anybody has, it's essentially the same who, what, where, when, why, and sometimes how. So how is the tool being used and by whom? Earlier today, we talked about finding out what's actually happening. You can't work under those assumptions. You have to knit together two different disparate points of view. The first is that traditional data mapping one, where you go to IT and you say, okay, well, what do our systems and our traffic patterns indicate? What's going on here behind the scenes? You know, what kind of traffic do we have? What's hitting the firewall? What do we support as the organization? That's one half of it, and that's reasonable to do. But the other half is you have to ask the people what it is that they're doing. And then ask the people what other people are doing, because sometimes people aren't as self-revelatory as you might like them to be. You build up what's on the people side, you build up what's on the technical side. You're as close to the truth of what's happening with the organization as is possible for you to be. Jason mentioned litigation. I mean, I'm a litigator first and foremost. I deal with witnesses, I go to court. I have to figure out what people are going to say. And I will tell you, I don't ask a question once. I ask the question 4 or 5 times. And I tell my witnesses when I'm preparing them, I'll say, it's going to sound like I'm being repetitive. I am. It's intentional. And I'm sure you've all had this experience. You say, hey, what about this? You ask it 4 times. And the 5th time you ask that question, they say, hey, wait a second. Do you mean X, Y, or Z? So going through all these questions, but not just asking them once. And then how do you answer those questions? This is where you can also help your organizations. So it's building consensus, understanding the politics of an organization and how you can actually effectuate change. It's not enough just to say, hey, this is the answer here. You just shouldn't use this technology. You have to be realistic. One of the best stories I have is there was a multinational company that came to us and said, hey, we use WhatsApp, or we'd like to use WhatsApp for our communications. We think that we've already got people that understand it. They know how it's going to be used. Can we do that? So we undertook that legal analysis. We looked at the terms and conditions, which as the lawyers in the room, that's your job. Everybody else just scrolls through and hits accept. No, you have to actually read those. It's nice when you get paid to do it. We looked at those terms and conditions. WhatsApp, what do they say in their terms and conditions? They say, don't use us for commercial reasons. Totally not going to support you. Don't do it. Easiest memo ever to write. Send it back to the client. Next call, they said, hypothetically, let's say we've been using it 6 months. What do we do now? So again, you have to deal with the policy and the reality of what organizations are doing. And then finally, this is where I think there's a real area and opportunity for India. You already have the infrastructure built up here. Remember what I was talking about with benchmarking? You can work on benchmarking. You have enough of the organizations coming to you. You can start to knit together what best practices will be for these newer technologies. These companies aren't just asking what's the right thing to do objectively. They're saying, what are my colleagues doing? What are these different companies doing? How can we cross-pollinate and understand that? That's going to rely on focus on this in a way that you can do that your in-house people, your clients, don't have time to do. They're running companies. They're doing strategic decisions. They're trying to hit budgets and bottom lines. You have the opportunity to really focus on these issues and say, hey, this is what we see happening. These are ways in which we can help. Same thing, economies of scale and immediate scalability. If I'm in an organization, and I was in-house for a while, if I had a problem come up, I didn't suddenly get another 40 hours a week to deal with the problem in addition to all the work that I had. That's when I would rely on my outside providers to say, hey, I need to address this. I want to address it in a timely way. Can you help me deal with this in a way that's going to make sense for my organization, that's benchmarked against other practices, and ultimately is both going to be defensible and will work? Can you come back with a plan? And that's why I asked about Slack. If I wanted to come to you as a provider, I want you to already have familiarity with the tool. Those things are free. There's no reason why you shouldn't know what they are, how they work, and what advice you can offer. It does not take that much time to get at least the beginnings. Because you want to go into a meeting and say, I'm familiar with that technology. I've got it on my phone. It doesn't require a PhD in it. No offense to those of you with PhDs in certain things, but to get started in that conversation, it's just about educating yourself. Finally, it's the value proposition, helping risk mitigation, and then when we talk about fact development, understanding these technologies because they're going to be part of how you develop facts for litigation and understanding and helping your clients. That's it. Please read the paper. Any particular questions? I was trying to to hit close to time. All right.
Any questions for anybody?
All right. Big round of applause for me. Come on. Thank you.